The silence of the Rift Valley was not empty. It was heavy, pressing down like the slate-gray clouds gathering above the jagged teeth of the escarpment. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a world holding its breath. Kael stood motionless on the basalt ridge, the wind whipping his course. Matted hair against a brow that was heavy with the ridge of his ancestors. Yet, eyes that burned with a startlingly human intelligence. He could smell the storm coming, the metallic tang of ozone mixed with the rot of the marshlands below, but beneath that, he smelled the musk. It was a scent that triggered a primal alarm in the reptilian base of his brain, a chemical signal of death. 30 yards away, the golden grass parted. It did not rustle. It flowed like water around the prow of a ship. From the tawny sea emerged the head of the beast. It was a creature of nightmare proportions, a Pleistocene lion, a massive killing machine that outweighed Kael by 400 pounds. Its eyes were not angry. They were indifferent. Possessing the terrifying calm of a god, deciding which insect to crush. Kael's grip tightened on the obsidian flave in his hand. He did not run. For the first time in the history of his bloodline, the prey did not run. To understand the magnitude of this standoff, one must understand the terrified world into which Kael was born. This was the Gelasian stage of the Pleistocene epoch, roughly 2.1 million years ago. It was a time of geologic violence and climatic chaos. The lush, protective canopies that had cradled Kael's distant ancestors were receding, ripped away by a drying planet, leaving behind the exposed, sun-bleached savannas of East Africa. It was a world that offered no forgiveness. The landscape was a theater of war. To the east lay the volcanic highlands, smoking and trembling. To the west, the deep lakes that nurtured hippopotamuses the size of boulders. In between lay the killing fields, the open grasslands. Here, the hierarchy of life was written in blood. At the top were the saber-tooths, Dinophelis, and the giant hyenas. Bone-crushing scavengers that roamed in packs. Somewhere near the bottom, barely above the gazelle, were the hominins. Kael belonged to a band of Homo habilis, or perhaps the very earliest emergence of Homo erectus. They were small, barely 5 feet tall, creatures of the margin.
Watch full video, then like, comment and subscribe for more.
They were the scavengers, the watchers, the ones who waited.
For the leopard to finish eating in the trees so they could rush in for the marrow.
Their society was loose but binding, held together by the necessity
Of eyes. Eyes watching the horizon. Eyes watching the grass. Eyes watching the sky for vultures.
Political climate in this era was not a matter of laws, but of territory and calories.
A good year was one where the rains came and the carcasses were plentiful. A bad year meant watching the old and the young fade into the dust, their ribs pushing against their skin like the cage of a trapped bird.
Kale's lineage was defined by vulnerability. They had no claws, no fangs, no carapace.
They were soft bags of water and bone, walking upright in a world of knives.
But they had begun to develop something else, a weapon sharper than any tooth, the ability to foresee.
Kale had learned early that the rock in his hand was not just part of the earth. It was an extension of his will. Kale was not the strongest male in his troop.
A group of 20 individuals who huddled together in the rocky overhangs at night.
He was, however, the most observant.
The ascent of Kale, and indeed of his species,
Was not marked by a sudden physical transformation, but by a quiet revolution of the mind.
the struggle of his life was the struggle for protein.
The brain, that hungry, expanding engine inside his skull, demanded colossal amounts of energy. To feed it, leaves and tubers were no longer enough. They needed meat. But obtaining meat meant competing with the giants. One anecdote from his youth illustrates the precariousness of their existence. It was the dry season, the time when the water holes shrank to muddy scabs on the land. Kael and a younger male, whom we might call Elu,
Had ventured too far from the safety of the cliffs, lured by the scent of a rotting elephant carcass. They were scrapers, using crude stone tools to hack away remnants of flesh left by larger predators.
They had become complacent. The wind had shifted, carrying their scent downwind.
From his perch, he watched the massacre. It was a brutal.
Elu, panicked, dropped his stone and fled toward the trees. A fatal mistake in the open.
Kael did not run immediately. He scrambled up a solitary, dead acacia tree. From the brush exploded a pack of hunting hyenas.
Silent lesson in the physics of the Pleistocene. Speed is nothing without strategy.
That night, Kael returned to the overhang alone.
He did not mourn in the way modern humans might.
With weeping and ritual, but a deep, hollow silence settled over him. He sat by the entrance of the cave, taking a river stone and a larger hammerstone. Click, click, click. The rhythm of the napping was the heartbeat of his anxiety.
He worked the stone until it wasn't just a rock.
but a bifacial chopper, an edge capable of severing tendon and smashing bone. This was his ascent, the realization that if he could not outrun the monsters, he had to outthink them. He began to organize the troop not just as a huddle of fear, but as a phalanx of eyes and stones. He taught them that a stone thrown with precision could turn a single scavenger away.
But he had never tested this theory against the King of the Grass.
The day of the standoff began with a gift from the sky. A lightning strike had felled an ancient baobab, crushing a massive herbivore, a Danatherium, beneath it.
The meat was pinned, inaccessible to the lazy scavengers, but accessible to those with hands and tools who could dig and slice. Kale led the troop down. They worked with frantic intensity, the smell of blood acting as an intoxicant. They gorged themselves, their faces smeared with red, the primitive ecstasy of survival filling their chests. They were so consumed by the feast that they missed the silence falling over the savannah.
The birds had stopped singing. The crickets had ceased their soaring.
Kael stood up, his senses pricking. That was when the lion appeared. It was a male of the species Panthera, an ancestor to the modern lion.
But significantly larger, a beast built for wrestling bison.
It did not roar. It simply walked out of the grass, its shoulders rolling like fluid tectonic plates.
It saw the hominins not as threats, but as vermin on its kill.
Usually, this was the moment the hominins would scatter, shrieking, dropping their prize to flee to the cliffs.
The lion expected this. It took a step forward, a low rumble vibrating in its chest.
Deep enough to be felt in the soles of Kael's feet.
But Kael did not move. This was the great contribution. It wasn't the invention.
Of the wheel, or the discovery of agriculture. It was the invention of courage.
Kael looked at the meat, food that would sustain the mothers and the children for days. He looked at the lion.
And he made a calculation that defied 2 million years of instinct.
He raised his arm. In his hand was the obsidian chopper, black as the void.
He let out a sound, not a shriek of panic, but a guttural, aggressive bark.
Oh. The lion paused. This was new.
The vermin was barking.
Kael slammed the stone against the dead tree, creating a sharp, unnatural crack. He barked again, louder. He stepped forward.
The psychological impact of this action cannot be overstated. In the animal kingdom, by advancing, Kael changed his category in the lion's mind. He shifted from prey to rival.
The troop, initially poised to bolt, froze. They looked at Kael. Then, one by one, the other males picked up stones. They did not advance, but they stood their ground. They joined the noise, a cacophony of hooting, screaming, and rock clacking. The lion snarled, flashing canines the length of daggers.
It swiped the air.
A warning blow that would have decapitated Kale had he been 3 feet closer. Kale didn't flinch. He threw the stone. It struck the lion on the snout. A trivial injury, but a massive insult. The standoff lasted perhaps only a minute, but it stretched across eons.
The lion weighed the cost. It was well fed. It was not starving.
This strange, noisy, sharp-throwing mob was irritating and potentially dangerous.
With a disdainful huff, the massive cat turned. It did not run. Kings do not run. Kyle let out a breath that felt like it emptied his soul. He had looked death in the eye and made it blink.
The story of Kyle does not end with a crown or a palace. The cost of leadership in the Pleistocene was high.
The stress of constant vigilance wore down his body. By the age of 30, an elder in his time,
Kyle's joints were inflamed with arthritis, a consequence of the damp caves and the heavy loads.
His teeth, worn down to the gum line from chewing tough hide and fibrous roots, caused him constant pain.
He could no longer lead the hunt. He could no longer hurl the stone with the velocity of his youth.
the younger males, some of whom were his sons, began to take the lead.
There was no violent overthrow. The society of early Homo was pragmatic. Kyle simply moved to the periphery of the fire. But his twilight was not without purpose.
He became the keeper of the technique. He would sit for hours, his gnarled hands moving slowly,
demonstrating the angle of the strike, the platform of the stone.
Showing the young ones how to make the tool that saved them.
He bore the scars of his life, like a map of the territory.
The gouge on his thigh from a leopard encounter, the missing finger from a slip of the obsidian.
He became a living library of survival. He watched the world change.
The rains became less frequent. The herds moved further north.
He watched the troop adapt, using the courage he had introduced into their bloodstream.
His death, when it came, was unglamorous. A fever took him in the night. He died curled near the warmth of the group's huddled bodies, slipping away as the sun rose over the Rift Valley. The troop did not bury him. That ritual was yet to be born, but they stayed with his body.
Kyle's bones have long since turned to dust, ground into the silica of the African plain. No museum holds his fossil. No statue bears his likeness.
Yet, his legacy is written in the very DNA of the human spirit.
That standoff on the ridge was the moment humanity began.
It was the moment we decided that we would not be passive victims of the food chain. It was the birth of the defiance that would eventually drive us to cross oceans, cure plagues, and fly to the moon. When we look at a skyscraper, or a rocket, or a work of art,
We are seeing the echoes of that obsidian flake held tight in a trembling hand.
Kyle proved that the greatest weapon was not the claw or the fang,
but the will to stand firm when the darkness roars. We are the children of the ones who didn't run. We are the legacy of the lion's defeat.